Yeah. Okay, so I am recording. We have a decent sized group. So I think if you want to ask questions on chat, I'll try to keep an eye on that before I go to the new slides. We can certainly have discussions if we feel it becomes appropriate later in. So this presentation is really kind of looking at what is a waterproofing consultant looking for when they're reviewing our drawings. We'll also touch on how to manage that relationship with the waterproofing consultant to try to make things flow as smoothly as possible throughout the project. As I did mention to Yana, I did work with a waterproofing consultant firm called McGinnis Chen Associates, MCA, up in San Francisco for 2.5 years before joining Walters and Wolff. And while I was there, I was primarily working on curtain wall projects, anything from old stick systems built back in the 60s and the 70s up to new construction. So before we dive into the kind of technicalities, let's look at what a waterproofing consultant's priorities are. First and foremost, they should be wanting to service the building. Typically, they'll be asking the question, what's best for the building given the anticipated useful lifespan of the building? So in some cases, you know, for a very high-end building, government building, hospitals, whatever, they might recommend a different solution than a standard residential, which might be different than a standard commercial building. So they'll try to find the best solution for the building and the anticipated life cycle and use. The next thing they'll be looking at is how to take care of their client. Again, it can be a little bit subjective. They'll be trying to meet their own client's needs in terms of communication, level of detail, and also cost. One thing that we ran into a lot consulting is clients would say, we like the solution, but it's too expensive. What can you do to make it cost less? And so then, you know, as a consultant, you're trying to find the right recommendation without really allowing the customer to cut corners and cause problems down the road. The last one, which is really big and drives a lot of decisions and interactions with a consultant, is that they're working to mitigate their own liability. Typically, building waterproofing consultants are architects or have licensed architects on staff. And so they have to perform according to the architect's standard of care, which is shown in this box on the right of this slide. The key part is in the first sentence, where their services must be consistent with a professional skill and care ordinarily provided by architects practicing in the same or similar locality under the same or similar circumstances. So one example of how this can impact a waterproofing consultant in a way you would not expect happened to MCA a couple years before I joined the staff. They were doing a property condition assessment where you survey a whole building for the building envelope specifically. So they're surveying the whole building envelope, writing up a report, making recommendations for repairs, maintenance, etc. And during the survey, they went down a flight of stairs on the roof. They saw it. There was even like a picture of it that showed up in their report. The stairs are not compliant with modern code. They were at the time of construction of the building. And they did not mention this discrepancy, that they were not compliant with modern code in their report, because it wasn't part of their contract. It wasn't part of what they had been retained to do. Fast forward a couple years, somebody actually fell and got injured on those same stairs. The customer went through the report, saw that nothing was said about these stairs not being code compliant. They actually sued MCA and won the case. The reason being, even though checking for code compliance of non-waterproofing was not part of MCA's scope, they were an architect and they were expected to call out things like that according to the standard of care. So that's why you'll often see waterproofing consultants looking at much more than just waterproofing. And one last thing, oftentimes their specialty is not just waterproofing. They may also be what's known as building scientists, where they look at things like heat transfer, acoustics, water vapor transmission, building movement. There's a lot more to what most of these consultants do than just waterproofing. Okay, so when they get a set of drawings, one of the first things that they'll be looking at is how does the building move? They want to understand where the movement joints are, how they interact. Are they straight lines? Do they change? How does the joint move across different systems? So if you look at this photo on the right, the architect did not want a big movement joint running across the middle of the terracotta panels. So instead, the joint was, of course, at the curtain wall stack joint, and then it dropped along the curtain wall jamb to extend out along the window heads adjacent to it. What this means is you get pretty complicated movement at that location, and the waterproofing transitions and materials might have to be different at that location in order to accommodate that movement. This particular job, it actually failed the performance mock-up the first time through at this exact location right here. Because of the complexity of the movement, the substrate punctured the waterproofing membrane. So we had to recommend a thicker, heavier duty membrane at that transition. So a couple of things that we can do in order to facilitate these transitions. Waterproofing consultants are people. They check drawings as individuals, usually going through on Bluebeam or with a marker. And so if we gain their trust and show them that we know what we're doing right away, they'll just be looking at the big issues, working with us to solve the big problems. If we have messy drawings or we make mistakes in that first interaction or the first impression, they'll be scrutinizing everything we do, and it will oftentimes cause a lot of inefficiencies over things that just don't matter that much. So when we see transitions like this, when we see movement joints, one thing we might want to look at doing is showing them that we know what the movement is. So that can be in our introductory sheets on the shop drawings, putting down an anticipated building movement at certain locations. It can also be sometimes on details. I've seen little movement arrows where they have a plus or minus arrow that shows how much they're expecting the sealant, the joint to move, and it shows that the caulk joint is wide enough to accommodate that. Something else that we can do when we have transitions between adjacent systems, like this curtain wall to terracotta, we want to make sure that we clarify the scope, who owns what in our details. If we are, for instance, sealing to something that's not by us, we want to at least show the substrate that we're sealing to. For example, it could be flashing not by WWG. We do that a lot. If we do that, we just want to make sure that what we're calling out matches the architectural, that they also show a flashing there. If not, then the PM for the project might want to, or probably should, contact the architect, the consultant, and let them know that we might need to work out this transition together. Okay, and I don't see, are there any questions on chat yet? I don't think so. No, okay, so move on. Next thing that a waterproofing consultant will look at is going to be the frame anchorage. They have two main questions. Can the anchorage take the construction tolerance? So they're going to make sure, for instance, that we can accommodate the in and out or the left-right tolerance that that slab or steel will be built to. They're also going to look at the engagement of the anchor and ask the question, will the anchorage stay engaged under anticipated building movement? These don't really have much to do with waterproofing, but it's a basic check as an architect, essentially to protect them down the road. If something ever goes wrong with the building, they raise the question. So once they have a clear understanding of the building movement, the basics of the systems being installed, the next thing they'll really dive into, especially in curtain wall, will be the drainage path or the water management plan. They're going to look at our details and really dig into how does water move in and out of this system. the drainage path is really an opportunity to build trust with the waterproofing consultant. I know Lynn, for example, is working on some T-sheets right now, and I think we're discussing whether we should add an isometric like this at the beginning to show the customer how water moves through our system, so we don't leave them guessing. And what that does is it gives the reader a chance as they flip through our drawings to understand how everything works without figuring it out for themselves. And so you can see these two isometrics. The first one, the system's relatively closed, and then there's actually kind of an exploded one where you can really see the full movement of water. So I think, Lynn, do you know, are we actually working on that? I know the installation drawings are nearly done for the T-sheets.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm calling you out in the middle of this, Lynn.
I'm not, I thought we are not supposed to interrupt right now. I thought waiting for, I'm writing all my questions and I now try ask, waiting for Q&A sections.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, since you already brought this very good one, I believe Mark's still in this, Mark's doing our transaction detail section, which is big package. So that actually is follow our Walt standard. It's very clear, and this is mostly it's isometric.
Okay.
But you have bring a very good point about my T-sheet. T-sheet is very generic. It's not really. It's for system analysis, basically. It's looking for analysis. I'm not expecting to do too much on the T-sheets because you will make this one thicker.
Yeah.
It's a rule to measure that way. Instead, and try condense them information just by topic. Then you will review the detail by the additional real shop drawing packages. That's my assumption, because that's why I call that one title block pages. So it's like a index of the drawing. Okay, sounds good. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, it does. This is actually, I really like the drawing right now over here. I want to point out they have about the water drain system. You just point out on this one. Our water wolf, we're doing middle range style of curtain wall compared with some high-end true customer curtain wall, like you worked for Perms before, right? Yeah. Benson, I worked before, it's same thing. We have built-in internal drain system. I'm not sure that concept makes sense to you. Yes. You have cavity in front of the gutter, which is collect the water in then drain out to the bottom building, which is different. Yep. What are we doing right now? We don't have internal systems. So our water preventing system is much simpler. Our concept is the system gets any leakage inside, trap the water inside, we just let them drain out quick as possible. Right. And you can drain anywhere, as long as it not goes into the building, we're successful. So it's a very primary system we're dealing right now. It's totally different with the compromise, I mean, the complicated system you did before. It's much simpler. Yeah. So, yeah. Sorry, I interrupt. No, sounds great. Thank you. That was like right kind of what we're talking about. Thank you. Yeah. So after the consultant understands the drainage path, like what Lynn was just talking about and those details we're showing, they will dig into the details, and what they're going to look for is what we call dry and wet zone delineation. They want to understand where water is supposed to be and where it's not supposed to be within our system. And typically what we do is we'd actually sit there with highlighters and trace that line, the water line, across the detail, on and off the page. So when we're putting details together, we should be looking at every detail and make sure that we can trace that water line all the way through. And this one on the right, we actually had an interesting discussion about it in the training session yesterday. As you trace this line across the glass, which of course is a barrier to water, you get to the gasket. Some consultants will let that gasket count as part of the water line, and others will not. And that's because the gasket, when it first goes in, will probably be watertight, but over time it will often shrink and allow some gaps to occur that would let water into the glazing pocket.
most consultants that I've spoken with will typically allow this interior gasket to count as a definite water line because not much water will get into the glazing pocket. So then you could follow the water line across this face of the extrusion here, and you get to these ISO bars. Again, these are a little bit fuzzy. Some waterproofing consultants would say those block water and others will not. So if you're working with a consultant who would say that it doesn't block water, the water could run across this pocket all the way up to this gap here. And if water gets there, it's now behind the caulk joint. It's behind the sealant. Oh, chat. Oh, I will get to that question in a minute. So the water would be behind the caulk joint, and that would be considered a potential path of water ingress. There are two ways to deal with this. Oscar mentioned in our training yesterday, which I wasn't actually aware of, that in the shop, we typically actually caulk along the edge of this ISO bar all the way up and down, and we caulk it at the head. So we might be able to just report back to the consultant that no, we caulk this, it's actually watertight, it's just not shown in our shop drawings. If for some reason they don't accept that, you can always recess caulk joints, or for instance, if this is a beauty cap or pressure bar or a trim piece here, if it's not caulked, this caulk joint can always be recessed. When we were consulting, that's what we used to ask for at these conditions. And then we have a question, what if you heel bead the glass in the glazing pocket? So I think the question is asking if we put a heel bead back here towards the interior. That could be, it wouldn't necessarily help with this issue where we're looking at the possible breach being behind the caulk joint on the side. And what you really are looking at is closing off around this ISO bar here. Oh, Kendall, you're saying you're not sure if that's true. You can feel, okay. So I'm hearing some interesting comments about this whole jam. Kendall or Eric, do you guys want to come off mute and jump in?
Good morning. I don't believe that's true. I'd have to check with the shop to see, but we count the ISO strut as the water line, and we've never had any issues to date with water there and or with the consultant having issues with considering that the water line.
Okay.
I mean, so it's, you know, the few times we've had issues with the strut is when we've actually notched through the strut and then we don't do a very good job of caulking it, right? At the head where we have the glass edge trim, so on a Viso jam, where there's that glass edge trim similar to the head of the unit, we do run a bead of sealant in that little tiny 3/16 wide, 1/8 inch deep, or whatever it is, reveal, right? Because we're creating the water line from the jam or head to that glass edge reveal. That would be the only place we run sealant.
Okay, good to know.
And it's not over the ISO strut, it's really from the aluminum to aluminum, right? And then once we get the aluminum, we're assuming the ISO strut is the water line.
Okay, so I'm going to make a note of that, and I'm actually going to follow up because we had a very different discussion yesterday.
Kendall, who's our primary consultant if we have water problems? Who are we consulting to?
You mean who are the consultants that work on the jobs that we work on?
Yeah, I have
that the customer, that the owner or the architect hires or the GC hires?
I'm talking about the water consultant, like Rudy said this one, because if you remember, I have a lot of debate with Jumpstart.
Yeah.
I'm really, this is not, in my knowledge, I would say our system not watertight at all. Sorry. I have a lot of debate with you guys.
So we have SGH, RDH, CDC, ABBAE, and of course McGinnis Chin. So those 5 probably would be the big ones that we see here in California. I'm not sure if Jason sees others.
I worked with them before, many jobs.
Yeah, all the normal ones, yeah.
Yeah, I know. It really depends. Kendall, I don't want, sorry, sometimes I can say the big debate is that every time I challenge, I always get a response. We never have this problem. We work on this industry over 40 years. That's not the answer I like, which make me jump up on that one. Did not answer my question directly. The reason is this one. I checked our testing. I'm really not happy about the pressure we put on the mockups. I don't think the mockup testing can prove your answer. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
So I
Don't
think
be sorry for expressing your opinion, Lynn.
No, I don't want to interrupt. Go on.
no,
Judy.
this is
I don't want to hijack.
I appreciate the input, and I think it's good as a company to have these discussions. How do these all work? So
Yeah, we have to appreciate the virus that give us the chance.
yes, exactly. So I think this is very interesting. I think we'll definitely follow up offline with these people and maybe even send out an update based on what we find is true across the board. So I will probably try to follow up here in a couple days when we dig into this a little bit more. But I think this is also something, this illustrates a really good point about waterproofing, is that different consultants will call out very different things, and it's not a hard science. Like structural engineering, you can run an equation, you get a numeric answer, and it's strong enough or it's not. Waterproofing is very, very different. It's based on decades of experience that many of these consultants have, and my previous firm owners would even admit that sometimes it's like an art and it's a gut feel if something will work or not. So that is something to keep in mind as you're working with consultants and as you're going through these details. So get one more chat. I'll open that before we go. So material compatibility is something that some waterproofing consultants will check. They'll look at sealants, gaskets, setting blocks, the same things that we typically test through Dow Corning. They'll also just back check the materials to make sure that they all work well together. They'll of course also check waterproofing materials behind or in adjacent systems. So if a waterproofing ties into a rough opening, they might check to make sure there's, for instance, a sealant compatible flashing that we can caulk to. And that flashing will be compatible with the adjacent waterproofing. They'll also check sometimes if there's a highly reactive material in use. A previous job I used back when I was working on the East Coast had zinc panels. It's a highly reactive material. It can cause galvanic corrosion even with itself. So material separation is really important to protect the long-term performance of the building. So in this case, what we might want to consider doing is when the drawings go in as a package, as a submittal, it might be worth including a brief narrative. We have this highly reactive material, here's how we're separating it, here's how we're protecting components, to let them know just that we're being proactive about it and what the strategy is as they're reviewing our documents. Another thing that a waterproofing consultant will probably actually take a look at is serviceability. Again, they're looking at the life cycle of the building, the full ownership costs, and they want to make sure that whatever's installed is not going to be really expensive down the road. So they'll look at things like how difficult is it to replace glass in the future? How often do we think we'll need to replace these sealant or gaskets? Can we access the building? I was on one job where we had to do sealant and gasket replacement, and unfortunately the house rig that they had purchased couldn't access the top 60 feet of curtain wall because the wall was sloped. So the rig could drop down close to it, but you couldn't actually reach the wall from the house rig. So every time they did maintenance, they had to pay for a very expensive, custom engineered, counterweighted temporary swing stage. in order to do their maintenance. So they'll ask questions like this. They'll ask what type of access we might need in order to do repairs in the future. I think Steve Watts mentioned yesterday that sometimes we even advise the owners on this in the early stage of a project. And the last thing that they'll check is pretty straightforward. They're looking at conformance to specifications. They will pull out all the specs for the curtain wall sections. Sometimes they'll even help to write it if they've been on board for the project since the design phases. They may have even written the specifications. So they'll pull out the specs, they'll pull out our submittals, they'll cross-reference them, make sure that we meet all of the requirements. They'll look at things like what's shown on the right, the air infiltration, water leakage, warranty, curtain wall system. Is it the system that was requested? Again, they'll look at materials, they'll look at finishes. Again, a lot of these things are not necessarily directly related to waterproofing, but they do relate to the architectural license that most of these consultants have. So they'll be raising any questions or red flags that a consultant would raise, or sorry, a licensed architect would raise who's reviewing this same package. One note, if we're ever submitting test results, for instance, for a buyout system, if the test results that we get from a vendor are like 20 years old and we push that through, we may want to ask the vendor in advance before we submit those, has your system changed at all since these tests were performed 20 years ago? The reason being is most of the specifications allow cross-section changes or die changes of like plus or minus 10%, either in hardness, cross-section area, dimensions, etc. So we might just want to confirm that they haven't seen significant changes before submitting, because I know as a consultant, when I got 20-year-old tests, I would challenge them because it's hard to believe as a consultant that nothing's changed in 20 years or has changed much. So it's just a variable to be aware of. So in summary, waterproofing consultants often check a lot more than just waterproofing. We do gain or lose their trust either in the first couple pages or the first couple of minutes in a meeting. And it's really to our advantage to try to gain their trust and work collaboratively with them so that we can focus on the aspects of our system and our designs that really matter and not get hung up on details. I'd like to say a special thank you to the principal at MCA who did help me with this presentation. See if we have any questions or comments.
Can I say something of this one? I'm not sure. PM and engineer in Walt, we did so many years on this industry. Have you feel, how did you feel about consultant, Kendall? You know, from my experience for years, probably, I guess Rudy probably have same feelings. You usually feel like consultant against you.
Yes.
Right? I tell you what, I deal with Isabel, IBA, I think they changed the name. Rudy, you probably know, in New York.
Yes, Israel Berger and Associates.
Yeah. We consider they as most restricted in the world consultant, right? I did some job like 3 years design field. I would say I prepared for it, like fight, you know, try to answer the question, get our drawing approval. But after that experience, actually they teach me a lot. Mm-hmm. We really need to collaborate, calm down, nothing personal.
Right.
They are representing for architect, like Rudy actually mentioned, very good. They have some things behind of it. They try to looking for everybody try get away from the liability. I don't want, even the insurance, they give you liability. They try avoid it. Mm-hmm. So need to be careful looking all the comments, what they stamp. It's very important, is that covered or not covered? There's nothing personal over here. They are representing as an architect, because architect does not understand curtain wall. They are prox for the architect. When you're talking, they are expert, we are expert. So my recommendation, special for PM and the leader of jobs, don't think they are against you at the beginning of the stage of the job. try to make them work for you as a team. Respect to them. It's important. Change your attitude. You will, trust me, will make your job much smooth.
I think that's a
yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point, and thank you for mentioning it, Lynn. It can feel like they're working against us a lot, and sometimes they're human. If they feel like we don't know what we're talking about or they're frustrated with our drawings, it can take that tone. But for the most part and most often, they are working to protect their customer and protect their firm.
Yes.
And if we go at it with that approach, it can be a collaborative experience that will ultimately make it a more successful project.
Yeah. Well, for some difficult case, like you point out, it's contradicted. Not every consultant has their own lab to test. Sometimes based on experience or report or general information from web research. They do a lot of researches too. So, so something is debatable and also job-based, like how long our job for our coverage. Let's say if our warranty like provide only 5 years, well, 5 years down the road, if something happened, honestly, who cares? I mean, this is business, right? But, in the long run, we really need to think for customer. Like you mentioned, like a replacement. I think, our Jumpstart department really think about replacement because what's the word? Sustainability, right? Mm-hmm. The function requirement is on the curtain wall. I would say like Bible requirement for almost all curtain wall. You need to have the sustainability for glass replacement, everything. All this accessible, we do need consider that one. I would say our job, special for our sunshade system, I don't think we really consider that one for replacement. Because in general, glass has to be replaced from exterior. Like Rudy mentioned before, if you don't have the function, you're gonna replace it from inside the building. That's very costly for us. Mm-hmm. Don't do that, I recommend. But another thing, people probably think, oh, we never replace that one. Well, I tell you, they have one building, actually it's downtown beach. I've been called for 3 times at least for replace glass because the glass was shot. It's shot by someone. It's courthouse. What's the name? LBCB. I think Long Beach New Courthouse. I did that one many years ago. Just I was be contacted because we need to replace the glass. We have like close 30 type of glass over there. This have a different variation, have a bullet resistant. So it does happen. Sometimes it happened it's during the service time. Sometimes it happened during the installation time. It's damaged. You have to replace on the building. So we have to think about that function.
So Lynn, thank you for that. I do think we may get kicked off here in about 5 minutes. So I just want to see if there are any other questions, anything else you'd like to discuss or bring up. Does anybody else have anything?
If anybody else have questions, I can talking with you forever. Anybody else have questions? I mean,
at least now I know who to ask if I have a question.
Yeah, Rudy, this was really good. And I mean, as you mentioned, the waterproofing consultant is not our enemy. It's a team effort. And we go in with that typically trying to foster that relationship because it just makes the job that much better. A lot of times the owner tries to put us at odds with them because they ask for something cheaper. Mm-hmm. And we need to we are taking a stronger stance on not modifying their design to take ownership of it, right? And to answer Lynn's question, we replace glass every day. Just ask SPD.
Oh, really?
So glass can be replaced every single day, and it has been, and it always
will. Rudy, I'm not sure. Do you have experience about? I don't really have a decent knowledge about that one, because I use M-Seal for some big joint sites. I actually asked this question with Jumpstart because I know our normally details show 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch. The joint, I'm talking about the joint size, right?
Yep.
It's based
Yep.
on installation requirement or like a silicone compressed. Normally,
Yep.
I understand for the compressed, like a 791, you have 50% compressed
Right.
expansion, right? So I'm not sure Jumpstart realized that one. Dell actually required when you talk about the shear directions, differential movement, is that 1/3 of the distance?
Oh, I don't remember. I would have to look at their data sheets. I don't remember,
Yeah,
but it is less because it's not as strong, I
yes.
think, in shear.
Yes. So, but we just had a engineer meeting this morning. They show like 1 inch joint all the way around the door because try to take the differentiate. I would say jam mounting definitely you don't need because it's in shear direction, probably only 1/3 or maybe even less. So another thing, because we probably end, another thing is quick. So do you have the data to evident to show? Because I know the back rod have different size. We have round, typically square, rectangle, anything bigger than that. Because sometimes if it's bigger, like I usually up to like 2.5 or 3 inches, I don't use normal back rod. I use square foam block.
Okay.
Closed cell foam block, which does not absorb too much.
Right.
When you have a square one, you can resist the push because silicone, when you caulk in silicone, you need pressure, right? To squeeze the air out. So in order you cannot have any bubble inside the silicone joint in order for watertight, I mean scientifically.
Right.
There's another thing, if you go to bigger for expansion joint, I use M-seal before. So
yes, so when we were consulting, we would, some of the pre-compressed expanding foam joints can count as a primary seal. Some can't, some can, and I forget which brands do and which don't. But we did sometimes use M-seal in those large joints, and it looks pretty good. It can look clean.
Right. My concerns are, I think I recommend Jumpstart probably need to spend some time study this one to give a guideline. How big the joint we should consider use normal, just back rod, pressure over there, make it work. I doubt it. Some joint you can open like 3.5 inches. You still use a normal one. I even doubt you can buy the back rod that size over there. So I think that's important to make sure our drawing, like Rudy mentioned, if your drawing looks a little crabby, some consultant even, they already have an impression over there. They don't trust you.
So I think it's 11:39. I think we'll probably lose the call very soon. This was not set up from a pro account. But I want to thank you all for attending. I did record this, so we will be putting it online. And let me know, feel free to email, text, call if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you, Rudy.
Thanks, Rudy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.